every year we would coach, by the time I left, close to 20,000 people. We had created a robust software platform, which allowed coaches that we trained to be able to coach up to 500 people simultaneously. If that sounds bonkers, it would have sounded crazy to me too, for sure. I remember when I first started online geographically independent coaching, 25 or 30 people would have me starting to forget names, So how could you possibly get to 500? But we had built a software platform that essentially outsourced all the admin to computers, which is what they do best, and left the coaching to the coaches.
Hi, I'm Lauren Parsons.
And I'm Andy Jackson, and this is the ALWELLCO Podcast.
Dive deep with us as leading experts share their unique perspectives on topics such as recovery, sleep, movement, and the latest innovations in the space.
So welcome to the ALWELLCO Podcast, John. And, before we kind of dive into your journey, let's kind of just set the stage. You and I have obviously known each other a couple of years. Can you just, talk about how we first connected, what drew you into the ALWELLCO community? Just be great to get a little bit of background on that, please.
Totally. It was actually a fun time reminiscing about the good old days. I'm air quoting for those listening in just audio. But yeah, I mean, I remember like the first two times we actually got together, I had just started to get to know the folks at PT on the Net. And Richard had invited me out to Colorado to speak at a event, which I think it was the first one. And what was it called again? The
Meeting of the
Minds.
Meeting of the Minds.
Yeah. And so I'd flown out to Colorado. I was living in Canada at the time. And I had just moved there recently. I'm from the States originally, but I went to Canada to do my PhD work. So I was living in Canada at the time, came down to Colorado, met a lot of really cool, smart people, had a wonderful conference. And then I think that's where you and I met for the first time. And then we all connected. And then there was stuff, PTA Global sprung out of that, which was a innovative certification and education group. And then we spent some time in San Diego making some recordings and some education stuff. And then we just kept in touch over the years. You have hooked me up with all my Vivo shoes over the years as well, my barefoot shoes. Got me really turned on to that, and which I almost wear nothing but those.
I hope you got the kids. I hope you got the kids wearing them too.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Good. We are huge fans. Obviously, like if we're playing soccer or football or on the track, we use sport specific footwear. But generally, walking around, people generally don't see us in anything but, because they're just obviously there's all the foot health stuff. But if they're not comfortable and then they don't look cool, then you're not going to wear them. So that is the other benefit. They feel absolutely great. People always, still to this day, anyone who wears barefoot shoes could probably attest. No matter where I go, people look at my feet and they're like, "What are those? They look so comfortable."
Yeah.
So I'm an unofficial, unpaid brand ambassador for barefoot shoes in general.
Being Scottish, they're the best. Hey, I have to say that Lauren and I are feeling only slightly nervous today because we know you were a very, very successful podcast host. You got your podcast right up there on the Apple charts, etc. So you just tell our listeners a little bit more about what you did on the podcast and your podcast?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it was a thing for a minute there. I had in 2017, after growing Precision Nutrition and running that for, as you said, a couple of years, I retired. I sold the company, retired, and in my retirement, we pulled our kids out of school and we were homeschooling and traveling around the world and having a good time. And I felt an itch to do something adult work. A few hours a week. That was my initial schema. I'm like, I'd love to do something a few hours a week of adult work, to challenge my mind and stay current on topics. And because homeschooling is like this all-encompassing adventure. I mean, we were literally, we would, the kids would wake me up in the morning. So I'd wake up and see them. And then we'd be together until they went to bed. And then when they go to bed, and then you prepare the lessons for the next day. So it was very all encompassing. And so I wanted to do something non-kid, And so I'm like, let's do a little podcast. I have an idea for, we could do these thematic shows. They wouldn't have to come out every week. We'd just work on them. And then when the theme was ready, we'd publish. And I had an audience already,
Yeah.
right? From Precision Nutrition. I mean, I no longer was mailing that mailing list, however, which was about 1 million people. However, people followed me on socials, and PN would give us a little bump from time to time and send some people to the podcast. But we did far-ranging topics, some in health and fitness, some outside of health and fitness, and they were highly produced. They weren't so to make a single show, which would usually be 2 or 3 episodes, I would probably interview 10 people, and we'd collect, I don't know, 20 hours of content, and then we would pare that down into 2 or 3 45-minute episodes with cool music and narration, and there were I'll put in air quotes again, actors and actresses, which were usually my friends and my children, who would appear and do voices and stuff like that. And yeah, it was really, really cool. It was the adult kind of challenge I was looking for. It just became a huge production. I mean, I was easily towards the end there spending 60 hours a week on it, which is, quite opposite of the 10 I was hoping to get. And that's why we shut the show down. And like you said, I mean, it was when our shows would drop, we would consistently be in the top 10 on Apple, next to Rogan, before he was on Spotify, and next to Tim Ferriss's show and all the big shows at the time. But it was taking away from my number one priority, which was family and homeschool and travel and these experiences, and understanding that the time with our little ones is fleeting, and it'll be over before you know it. We just decided to can the show, and we shut her down.
Well, I'm looking forward to getting some tips at the end, but I don't want the tip, Andy, you need to spend 60 hours a week.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
That tip I don't.
I might not hear that one.
Yeah.
This is the one, I've had some success in business and in various ventures and stuff, but honestly, sometimes it comes at a cost, right? And the cost for me is often an obsessiveness about my work, where I want it to reach a certain level of quality. Like if I want to start a podcast, I go listen to all the best podcasts. And I see who's doing what, how are they doing it, and I break it down. I understand the formula, and then I want to go duplicate it. And obviously, if someone's 10 years into their podcasting adventure, they've had a chance to ramp slowly. I believe I can ramp in 1 month, you know what I mean? But it takes a tremendous amount of extra effort. And then you realize, okay, in the beginning, you don't have a lot of sponsors and money, so you just have to pay for that quality in your own personal time. And this has always been kind of my blessing and curse. It was a blessing before I had a family, because then I could just work, you know what I mean? I could do 60, 80 hours, whatever it took. So it's one of the things that was a big learning lesson for me, right? Where I retired, I was like, hey, let me dabble in a thing. And I learned, John Berardi can't dabble very well. You know what I mean? So if I'm going to take something on, it has to be, there has to be enough space and time for it. And if there isn't, then I have to totally orient to it in a different way than my mind would normally race me toward, more.
Yeah. So I'm excited to get into Precision Nutrition, which is your first venture. But before we do that, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background. What did you study in school? Where were you? I know you mentioned America and Canada, and where are you spending your time? And
So I grew up in the States. I wasn't a particularly good student growing up. I ending up with a master's and a PhD, people think, oh yeah, you're a smart guy, and I probably had some hidden intelligence. But growing up, I was just up to no good most of the time. I had a bad friend group, and high school was a write-off, and barely graduated, and didn't get any universities afterwards. And the wake-up call for me was my dad ran a breakfast and lunch cafe, and so after high school, I started working there, which the alarm clock went off. The front number was a 3 something. So waking up super early, going to the restaurant, working long hours there, I was like, this is definitely not for me. So I went to community college and started studying some things. I was into strength and weight training and bodybuilding at the time. That's around when I competed. And I just was like, I don't know what I want to do or be or get a job, but let me just study the things that I'm interested in, and see where that goes. And I mean, in general, people aren't, at least in my case, weren't super supportive of that. Like, oh, you're going to take an exercise class in university? Like, what is that? Like, and especially my immigrant parents, they were like, why don't you go get a trade, a profession? You know what I mean? But I just was following my interests. And what tended to happen was, for me, when I followed my interest, I started caring about it a lot. And when you start caring about it a lot, you do pretty well at it and you start standing out. And that's what happened. So then I finally applied to university, got into university. I graduated number 2 in my class in a pre-med degree. So I still wasn't convinced I wanted to do medicine, but I love learning about the body. So my whole undergrad experience was going to these classes on chemistry and biology and biochemistry and pharmacology, and figuring out ways to pervert what I was learning to sport performance, muscle building, and fat loss, So every class for me was a fat loss class or a muscle building class or a sports performance class, whether the professor knew it or not, And so then I did apply to med school. And on the 11th hour, I was like, I just don't think I'm going to have any fun doing this. I'm like, it seems like a hard challenge. And I was interested in hard challenges at the time. But I don't know. I think I should just keep studying exercise and nutrition. So I went and did a master's in exercise science. That went really, really well. Got a lot of offers to do a PhD. That's what brought me up to Canada. A really well-known protein researcher named Peter Lemon had recently gotten this is kind of an interesting story, but he had spent most of his career at Kent State University in the States. And Joe Weider Foundation, most people know who Joe Weider is. So the Joe Weider and his companies got into some trouble for false label claims on some of their nutritional supplements. And so part of their penance was to donate a bunch of money and create an endowed chair position at a university, which is basically you put a bunch of money in a fund. It accumulates interest over time. That interest pays for a lab and a faculty member. And so anyway, this Peter Lemon was from Canada, would have loved to go home to Canada. He got this Weider position. And then I came shortly after. So our lab was flush with money. I had one of the top researchers in the world. I was like, I'd be a fool not to go do this. So that's where I did my PhD, and it was in exercise and nutritional biochemistry. Okay. So now I was really lucky. You hear stories about how when maybe smart people meet the right time and climate in the world, cool things happen. Very famous stories like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. You're like, hey, if these guys were born a decade earlier, they probably have some success, but maybe they're not Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, right? They need the computers and the development of computers. So they came at the perfect time, with their perfect interests, with what the world cared about in that moment, and kablam, right? So kind of the same thing for me. I was just doing this stuff that I was interested in, which specifically was kind of sport and exercise nutrition. And people started to care about it at that moment. Sports teams started to care about it at that moment. It's easy to forget, but there was a time when, an NFL football team didn't have a strength coach. Yeah. They thought it made you slow and muscle bound.
Yeah, bulky.
And then there was a time before they cared about nutrition. And there was a time before they cared about sleep and stress management and mental health, right? So all these things are happening now, but there was a time when they weren't. And I just happened to come along and be interested in these weird things right when everyone cared about it.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the development of precision nutrition. While I was a master's student, because I was not only publishing research on nutrition and sport performance, but I was writing about it in lay publications. I was getting invited to go cool places and talk to interesting teams and coaches. And so this is all happening in helping me pay my way through university and my PhD program. So then when I graduate, the stage is set for doing something, starting something, which was the start of Precision Nutrition.
Yeah, well, let's get into it. Let's get into, what precision nutrition is. And, our listeners are professionals across so many fields, and I'm sure a vast majority of them already know. But for those that don't, could you explain what that company is?
Yeah, for sure. And, full disclosure, I'm not involved with Precision Nutrition anymore. Started the early version of it around 2003. So, 22 years ago.
Wow.
Ran it till sold it in 2017. And Precision Nutrition basically did three things, really. Nutrition education, which was for recreational exercisers and athletes interested in looking, feeling, performing better, and for professionals. So that was our certification arm. So for recreational exercisers, we had the world's largest coaching program. So every year we would coach, by the time I left, close to 20,000 people. We had created a robust software platform, which allowed coaches that we trained to be able to coach up to 500 people simultaneously. If that sounds bonkers, it would have sounded crazy to me too, for sure. I remember when I first started online geographically independent coaching, 25 or 30 people would have me starting to forget names, So how could you possibly get to 500? But we had built a software platform that essentially outsourced all the admin to computers, which is what they do best, and left the coaching to the coaches. And so, many research publications came from our work in that arm of our business. We had, it was a big deal in the industry. Lots of people knew about it. We used to have a big prize, like a contest for the most successful participants, and we would fly all over the world with these gigantic novelty checks and surprise folks with money. There was a $25,000 prize for the best body transformation each round. Had some cool experiences. We had winners in Australia and Italy and Canada and the US, and we got to go surprise them. So that was our coaching arm, right? So coaching a lot of people each year, collecting, which still is the world's largest database on body transformation. Next was educating professionals. So after doing that, a lot of professionals were like, can you teach us how you do this stuff? So we're like, yeah, we can. So we created a certification, which went on to become the world's largest nutrition certification. Close to 20,000 professionals went through that a year. And then we realized, and we were fine with that business. It was wonderful, right? It was the things we were excited about. It was a lot. We were servicing a lot of people. We were very highly profitable and well respected. But this one problem kept coming up, which was we are coaching these people in a very specific way using technology. We're certifying people in the profession, health and fitness professionals, personal trainers, people who work in wellness, health coaches, whatever. And we haven't connected the two. So this was toward the tail end of my tenure, but we created a software platform called ProCoach, which allowed our professionals to use the same software that we use and taught them how to use it to be able to scale their businesses and coach up to 500 people themselves. And so that was really our first. That was a game changer in our professional world because it was really the first platform of its kind. And also, it was a software as a service business, which allows a business to rapidly scale, right? So if if I sell you coaching, you'll usually do coaching once and hopefully you'll have a really positive outcome and then you won't ever need it again, right? So you can't be a repeat customer of mine necessarily. If I sell you certification, you're certified, you're done, and that's it.
Yeah.
But with software as a service, we have, 1,000 people the first year, they sign up the next year and we get 1,000 more. And now you have this rapid growth of the business. And so that became the thing that really kind of catapulted us forward.
And it's a 100% remote company, right? Can you just explain how that works?
Yeah, exactly. So, when we really got going, I was living in Texas Phil Caravaggio, my partner, was in Toronto. So it's kind of by necessity. We're like, hey, we need to figure out how to work together when we're in two different countries. And then we've started hiring people. We were like, our model for coaching is the benefit of the internet is that you can do it in a geographically independent way. You can find a coach that you respect. You can find a coach that's talented, that maybe is world class anywhere in the world. And the internet facilitates us working together. And if we use it right, it may facilitate a better working relationship than if we had an in-person one, right? So that was our challenge. It wasn't like, how can we approximate the in-person relationship on the internet? It was like, how can we make the internet experience better for what it is, right? And so we asked the same question. How can we make the working experience better using the internet for what it is? So by the time we sold PN, we had 120 something full-time, full benefits people all over the world. And, there was a sort of a concentration of team members in Toronto at the time, because at that point, a lot of us were living in Canada. But then those folks were like, wait a second, we can work and live wherever, can't we? We're like, yeah, that's the point. So then a lot of them just went other places. Like, oh, I'm going to go live in Belize. I'm going to go live in Costa Rica. So we had a lot of Canadians who now lived other parts of the world and work for our company. And we just used, collaborative tools. Most work is transactional, right? I mean, it's if we were a team working on a project, I would have a responsibility and each of you would have a responsibility, and then we'd trade the work on deadlines, right? Like, here's what you need to move your part forward, and then you need to hand it off to him, and then he needs to show it to me, right? It's transactional. Transactional online is easy with tools like Slack and Basecamp and a host of other things. But to have great team culture, you need relationships, right? So what we did is we just separated the two. We had small group, like small team tactical in-person meetings. We'd rent an Airbnb somewhere awesome and bring a small group tactical together to do some work in person from time to time, right? We don't have facilities. We don't have infrastructure to pay for. So it's even cheaper to do it this way. So we can have a team meeting with a 15-person team in Miami at a really awesome Airbnb on the water. And we can do that multiple times a year. And it costs less than having a rent in Toronto. You know what I mean? Yeah. So we got together for that kind of stuff. And then, the rest of the time was the transactional work. And then once a year, we had a really big team-wide party. And we'd go somewhere amazing and we'd have incredible food. And that whole meeting wasn't about work at all. That was just about being together. So it was all fun activities planned. Let's rent a private beach today. Let's get jet skis and go out on a boat. And let's all just spend time getting to know each other and being together without work and transactions. So that's how we ran it. And when you run a remote company, you can't necessarily use the same rules as in-person companies. And the one thing that we really like is going away from a hierarchical organizational structure to which is more like a distributed authority structure. So most people are familiar with, there's a owner of the company, a couple people report to that person, people work under them, and it's a hierarchy. It's top to bottom. You report to a boss, that boss reports to a boss, however high up it goes. And we were like, I was one of the big bosses, if you wanted to think of it as a hierarchy, right? I started the company. There were basically two of us. Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff that my team is working on that I know nothing about. We built our own software platforms. I don't have any training in software. I've never written a line of code. I'm going to be their boss. How exactly? Right? I'm going to tell them what to do. How? Like, I can share what the budget is. But how can I even set a budget for a software project when I don't know how much that kind of stuff costs, right? So the question becomes, how can we distribute authority across the organization so that there aren't bosses and employees, right? But there are, individuals who have full agency to do their work, who know the scope of that work and the boundaries around it, and could do it without anyone meddling, you know, especially people who they don't have any reason to believe can answer the questions better than they can, you know? So I mean, it's set up in a very specific way, and there's handbooks, and you have to learn how to use it just like anything new. But the practice we used was called holacracy, and it worked so well for us, you know? Now, there are still people who hold budgets. There are still people who hire and fire, but we don't think of it as bosses. It's just roles and responsibilities. My role is to hire people.
That's an interesting word, holacracy. Explain that to me. Holacracy.
Yeah. So the idea is it's a distributed authority system where there are circles of work that happen within the organization, and everyone is really clear and explicit on their roles and accountabilities, right? So in the olden days, before holacracy, I was the founder of the company and the chief worry about everything officer, right? Just who's doing what, make sure everyone's on track, and stress, right? What is my job? Well, I don't actually know. It's just worry about everything, make sure everything gets done, right? And when we started practicing holacracy, the practice is get really explicit about everything you do. Get out a pad, follow yourself around for the week, and write down every role and responsibility that you're doing. And then you look at it and you go, okay, that's a lot of things, right? But independent of that, now I'm clear. I'm actually thinking about this. And then that's how you then organize a company. You go, hey, we need to hire someone for what? Director of marketing. No. What's a director of marketing? It's 100 things at 100 different companies, right? What do we need in marketing? Oh, we need someone who will X, Y, and Z. All right, cool. We're going to be super clear about that. And then we're going to be clear about what they're not going to do so that when they come here, they don't try and do stuff they did at their old company, right? And then their team knows what they're accountable for and what they're not accountable for. And that little circle operates and makes decisions on their own, and they interface with the larger circle of the company as needed, as defined explicitly, by the people who have the role of integrating the company. You know what I mean? So everything just becomes this really explicit way of working together. It's like the rules for how we work together, right? And as an owner, it was incredibly freeing, because let's say I wanted to take a vacation. In the past, I'm like, how do I do that? All these people report to me. I have to do all these things. Yeah. I don't even know what half of them are until they come up. But now I know. So now I can go away and I can ask these 3 people to handle these specific things, which I know I do now because we're practicing this unique practice of governance in the company. So it was an amazing way to work. I don't know that it worked for every company. For example, at the time we were really thriving in this, Zappos wanted to adopt holacracy. So for some of the younger people, they might not know what Zappos is, but Zappos is one of the largest shoe distributor of online retailers in the world at the time. Super famous. Their CEO was very popular. He wrote a book.
Tons of business cases on Zappos. Yeah,
absolutely. So actually, we were hired to help Zappos implement holacracy. So we were part of a team of 3 companies that came in as sort of practical case studies of how it can work in different environments. And it didn't go over well at Zappos. They had too much organizational history. There was too big of a team. It just didn't work well. There was too much pushback from the staff. I suspect it wasn't explained and socialized well enough, and it happened too quickly. There's some reasons why I think it didn't work, but it's not for everyone, but it was wonderful for us.
Awesome. Well, let's kind of jump a bit more into the principles behind precision nutrition.
Yeah.
So I know that you offered lots of advice to Olympians, professional athletes, etc., and I'd love to just share a couple of bits on that. But
yeah,
is precision new? Is it new, or is it the same type of nutritional advice? Can I tell us a little bit about what you did with them, and then tell us about the actual advice of precision nutrition?
Yeah, I think the thing that made us really stand apart was a deep focus on we'll call it sort of behavior change, right? That's a cliched term nowadays, but when we began talking about this, there was literally none of this in nutrition. In nutrition, there was either sport nutrition, how do you eat for games or practices? There was clinical nutrition, so nutrition for diabetes, nutrition for renal failure. But, nutrition for people who already care about their health, who already have, let's say, a movement practice, didn't really exist. And part of it was how nutrition was set up in academia and how nutritionists were trained. The other part was how, physical fitness centers were set up, right? Like it was dominated by personal trainers.
Yeah.
Right. And at the time, they weren't allowed to give nutrition advice.
Right.
Yeah.
And if they did, what they would do is just hand people like a menu of what to eat for the day, right? Like, here's what you should have for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, which, if you're highly motivated and have specific skills preloaded, then that is possible to do. But most people don't, right? They have busy lives, they have old habits. And it's really interesting because coming from my background in academics, you are influenced by, these aren't heady, philosophical considerations. It's like, who's doing research on the floor of your building at the university? You know what I mean? Like, I go to this one lab every day, but I may go to lunch at this little cafe on the floor of the building that I work in. And if there are some psychologists who hang out there, I maybe get into interesting conversations with those psychologists, right? Or if there's someone who studies something, physics even, then I start to become influenced. So anyway, I started to become influenced by psychology. And specifically, I was like, oh, what are psychologists thinking about? Looking at, I dated a woman for a while who was a neuroscientist. And so the things that they were talking about, I was like, oh, that's pretty fascinating too. So I started to get my eyes open to this new field at the time, which was positive psychology, right? Psychology in the past was very sort of clinical, right? These are the disorders, these are diagnosable, this is what we do. But positive psychology was what we're talking about here, the equivalent of how do you help people eat who are already committed to health and a healthy practice. Positive psychology is how do you help people thrive rather than overcome illness. And so I got exposed to positive psychology and I got exposed to behavior change principles. And I was like, this is going to be the easiest thing in the world because there's these people up the hall from me who figured all of this out already, right? I don't have to invent anything new. I don't have to be an innovator or a pioneer of any kind. I have to take what they're doing and put it in health and fitness. And we did. That's what we did at Precision Nutrition. How do we walk people through a process that helps them go from where they are now to closer to where they would like to be? And to do that, you need daily habits, changes in your behavior. Again, nowadays, this doesn't feel innovative or revolutionary at all. But at the time, literally no one was talking about it. In business, they call blue ocean and red ocean spaces. Red oceans where like people are all fighting for the same resources and there's blood in the water. Blue ocean is there's literally no one here, just nothing but blue ocean around.
Yeah.
It was blue ocean space.
Yeah.
So that's what we did. We built a education and coaching platform around behavior change in the space of sport and exercise nutrition.
Sure.
And nowadays Precision Nutrition's so good at it. I mean, they've had a 10-year head start on everyone else, right? And they've been able to hone and practice it. I mean, to the point now, we'll probably talk about trends later, but PN right now is built an AI tool, so a large language model tool that's been trained on every coaching conversation that a precision nutrition coach has ever had with a client. So, I mean, it's millions, tens of millions of data points, right? So it's trained on every piece of education Precision Nutrition's ever done. And there's a lot of stuff that's not on the internet, not on every coaching conversation it's ever had. It's the world's best nutrition coach right now in an AI tool. So anyway, they're super good at this particular thing. And then really the philosophy behind what precision nutrition has become has been this idea of deep health, right? So rather than just looking at our exercise, just looking at our nutrition, it's how can we think about the integration of your whole self into a project of health and fitness, whether that's for a specific goal. I want to look good for a photo shoot, whether that's for longevity, health, anti-aging, whether that's for weight loss, whether that's for muscle gain, whether that's for being a better soccer player. But how do we integrate what we know about behavior change into sleeping better, managing your stress, your social and emotional well-being, your food, and your exercise? So that's what the programs have become, and that's what Precision teaches professionals now, this integrated approach.
That's what I was going to ask you, is that, so I know you sold 80% of your shares back in 2017, for an amazing valuation of 200 million. So well done.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
That's awesome. How's Precision Nutrition doing that these days, and how can our listeners benefit from it and get involved?
Yeah, I think, it sounds like a lot of the listeners in this podcast are health and fitness professionals. And if you don't know about PN, then you should learn about them. They give away a tremendous amount of free stuff, like free education, free courses, free articles, free infographics, things that you can print out and put up where you work if you find them valuable. And so, I think folks, if you work in health and fitness and you're not using Precision Nutrition's resources, you should. It's interesting because I do like no paid work in health and fitness nowadays, but because my kids are so involved in sport, I sometimes get asked to do some youth sport nutrition stuff with their various organizations. So our 12-year-old was just selected for a provincial football team. And so I just did a talk for the Team Ontario group of football players at all ages. And I was like, okay, I'm going to put this talk together. So I'm sitting down to make this talk, and I'm just like, everything's for this talk is literally free on PN's website. So I'm just pulling infographics off the site and dropping them into my talk, right? And it's okay because I'm the author anyway. So don't you all do this without giving credit, because
absolutely.
I'm like, I don't have to do any work to do this. Like, it's already been done. It's already been beautified. It's already ready. So there's just so much good stuff. I mean, PN's infographics on, eating before and after exercise, eating for weight loss, eating for weight. These things should be printed off and put up in gyms and fitness centers and wellness centers as free education for your teams.
That sounds great. But we'll certainly put a link up and send people in the right direction after the podcast.
There was even, I mean, again, this was like a coup for me, because I'm like sitting here like, all right, I'm going to take some time to build this thing. But I had even forgotten we had done like youth sports nutrition books on over 100 sports. So literally, if you're like, what's nutrition for soccer?
Yeah,
there's a book done on that. Football, rugby, dance, gymnastics, track and field. Just think of 100 sports. All customized and talking about the needs and demands of that sport. So again, for my football players, I'm like, here's a free book on this. And these are all free on the internet, by the way. You don't have to pay a dime for any of these.
That's remarkable. That's great. Well, let's jump in. So you got the odd dollar working on that business, and then you jumped into this next venture, the Changemaker Academy. What was that? What was that aimed at? What was that about?
Yeah, well, as I was wrapping up at PN, I had a moment where I was like, this might be the last time I work in health and fitness. I don't know if that's true or not, but it could be. I tend to be, and this motto doesn't work for everyone, but my motto tends to be, if I'm sitting here doing the same thing 10 years from now than that I am today, then that's a problem for me. Like, I haven't grown, I haven't expanded, I haven't learned a lot. Now, that might not be fully true, but it's how I feel. And so I know myself well enough to know that, like, hey, I might not want to walk down this same path again. I have this story. Like, when Phil and I started the early version of Precision Nutrition, we made a DVD set. Yes, a disc that goes, that thing.
I remember DVDs.
Yeah. And so every Tuesday and Thursday, we would walk a big pile of DVDs to Canada Post and mail out our DVDs to our customers for that week. And Phil and I lived in a loft in Toronto. So our front closet was full of DVDs, right? And so there have been times in my career where people ask me to do things, and I call it the DVDs in the closet project, right? Like, I already did that. I don't want to do that again, right? That's just me revisiting the past. I already have those skills. I already know how to do that. Unless it's a moment of desperation, I really need the money, I'm not doing that again, right? So anyway, PN wrapped up, sold PN. I was like, I may never work in this field again. While I still remember, I'd like to capture the lessons that I learned in growing this kind of coaching practice, growing this kind of team, growing this kind of business. I don't want or need to make any money off of it. I just want to capture it and share it. And if it helps people, that's amazing. And so I wrote a book called Changemaker. That was, as I was writing that, I was like, man, we're going to have the same problem that people do with nutrition and exercise, right? This is a book. People are going to need some coaching. They're going to need some practices. They're going to need behavior change. They're not going to get it all out of this book. So this is going to give people a lot of ideas, and it'll be a nice historical chronicle of my journey. But will it actually help as many people as I want it to? Well, sadly, probably not. I think it's a great book. It's got 5 stars on 800 reviews on Amazon. Other people think it's a good book too. But I'm like, we need some scaffolding for the people that need scaffolding. So that's what we created the Changemaker Academy to do that. So that offered courses on business, on marketing, on a whole host of topics, on career development, just basically to create a community to help people go through the process of building the thing they want to build, whether that's career, whether that's a marketing team, whether that's a business. So all very amazing. The book did better than I expected. We produced a beautiful thing that people still tell me, it still sells well, and people tell me it's making a difference in their lives. The company was going great. I was not operating it. I hired a young, passionate team who thought about these things and was interested in these things, and they ran that. And then actually just not very long ago, we decided to close that out too. One of the core principles in the Changemaker book and the Changemaker Academy was this idea of, discovering your purpose, using and bringing your unique abilities to bear on the execution of and the living of that purpose, and then scaffolding all of that with your values. So these are buzzwords, but purpose is just like all the stuff that's happened to you in your life makes you like certain things and want to do certain things over other things. So I got no judgment about what you decide your purpose is, right? But it's usually just a function of the stuff that's happened to you. A bunch of stuff has happened. So I like these things. I want to do these things. I want to help these kind of people, just for no other reason than that. Well, that's your purpose, right? And then that's not enough, though. You actually need to discover what things are special about you that can be brought to bear on that purpose. What things are you or could you be world class at? And when you do them, they make a difference. Those are the things you need to bring to serve your purpose. And then your values are kind of the guardrails, right? I will not cross this line to do these things, but I will recruit all the powers of the universe to do these things, And so these are some of the things we taught in the book. Lots of exercises on how to discover these for yourself. Lots of exercises and ideas on how to monetize them if money is one of your, purposes and values. For some, it's not. So this is less interesting. There's other currencies they want to exchange in. But for us, we actually did last year a reevaluation of our purpose, unique abilities, and values. And we said, not all of us feel like this is the space to continue in. So we closed down the business. I helped the team go find their next things, and now they're off to other things.
Okay, so let's start thinking about, there's a lot of noise out there in terms of the nutrition and wellness industry. So much conflicting advice. One day it's high carbs, next day it's protein, next day it's this way of hydrating or whatever. Is there anything in that kind of nutrition kind of world that frustrates you?
You know what? I mean, I don't know. If I was 28 years old, maybe, but at this age, I'm like rarely frustrated by anything anymore. I feel like if something is in my control, then there's no reason to be frustrated about it. I'll just go out and change it.
Any misconceptions you think that people are kind of perceiving in this kind of nutrition world that's really obvious?
There's always signal and noise, right? Signal is the principles that are true and work every time, and noise is all the other chatter. And there's certainly a lot more noise now because, to have an education platform years ago, you had to demonstrate credentials and credibility. Nowadays, you don't. You know what I mean? Like, you can have a channel and a platform and get a lot of followers without having any credentials or credibility. You could simply be interesting or entertaining, and that's enough. And I think that's where some of the confusion comes in. So step one for people who are feeling confusion is we need to revisit that first principle of credentials and credibility. They're not the be all end all, but Ray Dalio, one of the wealthiest people on the planet, friend and advisor of mine, has this believability criteria, which I think all people in all worlds ought to think about. So if you want advice on anything, investing, which is Ray's world, sport and nutrition, this world, you have to go find believable people to listen to. And now you can get advice from everyone, and I actually recommend it, but you have to believability weight that advice, right? So that person's low believability. They might be interesting and entertaining, but they're low in believability. So I may weight their advice a little lower.
Yeah.
So how do you find believability? Well, believability is, has the person done the thing you want to do successfully? That's step one. Number two is, have they done it in all sorts of other climates and conditions? In the investing world, it's not did you make money when everyone was making money. It's were you able to make money when everyone was making money and not making money? Were you able to lose less money than everyone else when everyone was losing money? So what are the conditions? Were you successful in a variety of conditions? In health and fitness, it would be that person's in wicked shape for doing that thing. Okay, that's only step one. Step two is, have they been able to repeat that over the course of a lifespan with loads of other people? If not, then believability goes down. And then the last is when they explain it, does it make sense? And there's two ways of making sense. One is, can I understand it? Because if you can't understand it, you can't do it, right? So that's the first. Mm-hmm. The second is, does it make sense for me in my life at this time, or for my clients and their lives at this time? If it's a super strict nutrition protocol and you have 4 kids like I do, and you work a very busy job and you have lots of extracurricular activities, then it doesn't make sense, right? You can't do it. So that's, so I advise people not to be frustrated. I advise people not to be confused. I advise people to think in terms of believability weighting. Get advice wherever you want.
So let me put you to the test here on this then, John. Let's take your principle here. So protein seems to be the hot topic right now. There seems to be a lot of misinformation out there.
Yeah, good. I'm glad protein's a hot topic right now.
Yeah, so come on then. Give me some science-backed ways to find those believable people, those people who've done it over and over again. Where do I find out and understand the need and use of protein, and maybe some things that people aren't aware of?
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, one of the most successful and famous protein researchers in the world is a guy named Stu Phillips. He's right up the road from me in Canada. Here's someone who's published hundreds of research papers on protein, someone who works out himself, someone who studies athletes and recreational exercisers, someone who's written exhaustively on this topic, has a PhD in this topic, runs a lab on this topic.
Yeah.
Believability weighting high. Yes? So why are we not reading him? Well, he doesn't dance around in his undies on Instagram. He's in a research lab. That's why some people haven't heard of him, but people should hear of him, and they should go follow his advice. At Precision Nutrition, we publish free articles on this often and exhaustively, citing people like him who are actually in the lab doing the research, discovering what actually happens under the hood with protein. Protein is fascinating because it's the simplest thing. I literally talked about this in the sports nutrition talk with 11-year-olds the other day. I'm like, step one in sport nutrition is really, really easy. Every time you eat, ask yourself, where is my protein coming from? Where am I going to get my protein in this meal? Right? And if you do that, you're like 80% of everyone else in the world. Right? So now we can talk about how much protein people should have. And if you're exercising, it's probably about 1 gram per pound of body weight. So you weigh 120 pounds, have 120 grams a day. Our oldest daughter, she's 14. She weighs 120 pounds. She's an athlete. She texts me every day. I did not ask for this. I get it anyway. How much protein she's had at the end of the day. Like that's her KPI, key performance indicator for nutrition. She knows that every time she then eats her protein, she needs to get fruits and vegetables with it. And those are her rules, right? That's what I said. What do you need to do for nutrition? Here's what you got to do, buddy. You need to eat 120 grams of protein a day. I don't care how you space it out. And every time you eat fruits and vegetables with it. You do that, we're done. So then she every day texts me, got 120 grams. If she gets 150, it's like a lot of GIFs and emojis. You know what I mean? Because she beat the standard, right?
Yeah.
But protein is so easy. Now, I'm a plant-based eater. Gnashing of teeth about animal versus plants. Don't care. The plant proteins are good now. If you use a supplemental protein powder, it's usually a mix of 6 or 8 different plant proteins. They usually supplement it with the limiting amino acids. I have a collagen product in my cabinet, which is supplemented with the limiting amino acid. So it's a complete protein now. So if you use supplemental protein, plant-based, you're good. You know, nowadays they don't have any inferior plant-based protein supplements in terms of like amino acid quality. And then, I don't know, someone said, a good friend of mine sent me a Instagram reel the other day about a guy talking about beef protein not being very effective versus whey protein. And these are like, and it was a kid, and I'm 50, so I can call anyone a kid under 50, you know? But it was like a young guy, you know what I mean? And I'm like, okay, let me Google him. No credentials. And you're just like super low believability. He's just saying stuff. You know what I mean?
Stuff he heard.
Yeah. And he was, and this is where it can get confusing. He was citing some research, right? This is where the confusion or like, what's happening here can come up for a lot of people. It's here's a person who's been platformed. I don't remember what podcast he was on, but it was on a big one. And he's saying things that don't feel true.
Yeah.
Right. It's just, it doesn't seem to make any sense. But he's citing research. I can get why people would be like, what's happening here? Right. Who do you believe? This guy seems to be citing research and he's on Joe Rogan or wherever podcast. And that's when you just go, wait, before I let myself feel emotions about this, right? Let me do a little believability check. Who actually would know, right? Nowadays, you could ask ChatGPT this question. You know what I mean? And it would answer authentically. Yeah. Now, an even better way would be, is there a person in the industry you trust to have good information on this topic, right? You can ask ChatGPT to answer like them, right? So let's say you trust me, right? So you would go on and you would type, hey, ChatGPT, I would like you to answer this question like Dr. John Berardi would. Right? I just heard that blah, blah, blah protein is worse than blah, blah, blah protein. Therefore, I should blank. What would Dr. John Berardi and the bulk of the research evidence that you have at your availability say about this? ChatGPT would thoroughly debunk it and give you good recommendations. Right? So we have this amazing tool nowadays to overrule human nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
And we can use it, right? And it doesn't even have to be, oh, but should I trust GPT? Have GPT answer as an authority.
Yeah, and cite sources.
And cite sources. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, people will say this now, but sometimes ChatGPT does hallucination, right? So that's this tech term for giving you the wrong answer. And so normally what I do is I ask ChatGPT, are you sure? Right? So it'll give me an answer. And this has been a project of mine. We have 4 kids. I want them using tools like this constantly, right? So we do ChatGPT lessons on how to do this. So I teach them this. Ask it to answer like this. Ask it to provide sources. And then when it's done, say, I'm not sure you got that right. Can you double check yourself and make sure you didn't make any mistakes? And there's a good 10, 20% of the time, it's like, oh, you're right. I actually said this when I meant this. Other times it'll be like, no, I double checked and I'm good. Like you can, it took longer for me to say these words in the last 2 minutes than for GPT to do this work for you. So this is the great equalizer. It's the great BS destroyer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you can fix this problem of conflicting information and confusion pretty quickly with a couple of strategic questions.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about the future.
Yeah.
What excites you most about the future of nutrition? And are there any emerging technologies? I know we just mentioned ChatGPT, but any technologies or methods that you think the audience would like to hear that they should start practicing themselves?
Yeah, totally. So the first thing is what everyone's excited about. It's AI and it's large language models and other, proprietary things that are being developed to give us access to all the knowledge, right? Filtered appropriately for who we are and what we want to know. I mean, for people who aren't using these tools right now, I don't know how I can convince them. If you spent like 20 minutes with me showing you what can be done on this, you'd be a believer for life. My boys are competing and I coach high level flag football. So we're competing at the World Championships in Orlando, Florida at the ESPN complex later this month. I was like, hey, ChatGPT, I'm going to Orlando for this. I'm going to be there these days. Can you find me flights, activities, restaurants, like plan my whole trip.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what you got to work around. And it's like faster than I can read. It's giving me my whole itinerary. You know what I mean? So in the nutrition space, obviously it can help you answer theoretical questions, but it can help you plan your meals. It can help you figure out what this food versus that food. It could help you come up with a weight loss plan, a muscle gain plan. Like it's the best expert. I read the other day a physician talking about how, right now, some of these tools are better at diagnosis and treatment than an above average practitioner, like family medicine practitioner.
I saw that too.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
And you're like, I believe it because I've used it for this, right? Now, it's missing certain things. So I'm not saying we'll replace all practitioners, right? Obviously not, right? It's missing certain things. It's missing human connection. It's missing certain things that maybe you haven't thought to ask, but a person would, right? Mm-hmm. Like the output of a chat GPT is only as good as the questions and the parameters that you give it, which is why I spend so much time with my kids on it. It's not necessarily that I want it doing their homework. It's that I want them to learn how to ask questions of the future. You know what I mean? Like the future is not going to be finding an expert and going to see them at the university or whatever. It's going to be tools like this, and you got to know what to ask, and you have to be really specific, and you have to say, oh, shoot, I meant something else. Let's fix that up. So that's obviously the most exciting thing right now. And then sprung from that are all kinds of applications, right? Like, for example, one of the big innovations, we worked on this at PN back in the day when Google first came out with Google Glass. And what we really wanted to be able to do was track people's food. Almost everyone has or can have a watch or a ring that will track their activity and their sleep and all these other things now. But the minute that you can actually non-invasively know exactly how many calories and the micronutrients and the phytonutrients that you ate, all of this matters. You know what I mean? For weight management, for weight loss, for weight gain, for sport performance. And then once we have data on that, we will be able to pre-diagnose a whole bunch of things that are coming to you, right? Pre-diabetes is around the corner if you keep having this balance of food and activity. Female athlete, endurance athlete, running a lot, getting no animal protein, you're going to have anemia soon, right? So like we're going to be able to get people before any of this happens to them through large data, understanding patterns, understanding inevitable like chronic outcomes. We're okay at acute stuff now. You did this happened, we know why, let's fix it in the future. But chronic things are more difficult. When we can do that, then it's game over, and I really like a way that I don't have to take out my phone to do it. Like if I was wearing glasses that took pictures of every meal that I had without me thinking about that, that would be amazing. Even more amazing would be if it recorded my environment. Like, hey, I noticed that when you're eating alone, you do different than when you eat with others.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So we're actually looking at behavioral influencers, environmental influencers. And notice when you come home at this time, you eat more than when you come home at this time.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, if a listener could implement just one thing to change today about their overall nutritional behaviors, what would you recommend? But I think you just answered it. I think you've just said is that ability to track your food, the ability to know what's coming in the future. I think that's what you would answer that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, tracking can be fraught for some people. You know what I mean? It can trigger disordered behaviors. It can feel weighty and difficult. But I would say that I have rarely seen anyone who's committed to tracking in a specific way go down a really dark path. Tracking for life is the problem. When you think that good behavior is weighing, measuring, tracking everything. Now, doing it for like a week or two and being done, like having a deadline, is really informative. For example, when we talked about protein earlier, I didn't finish the story, which was, let's say you have to have 160 grams a day from whatever sources, what does that even look like? Now, we teach people this hand-based measurement model. So a portion of protein that's the size, so the thickness and diameter of your palm, is about 25 grams. So if you need 160 grams, it's easy math to do. You can figure it out. That's how my daughter does it, right? So she's like, I had eggs this morning. It was about this much. I had turkey bacon. It was about this much. So she's not putting it into the computer anymore. But she did for a while. She actually used GPT. She said, here's what I had for breakfast. How much protein is that? But now she has that skill for life, right? She knows how much protein stuff has in it, right? So she didn't have to look at a machine or do a thing or write it down. It's just like in her, the most amazing calculator or machine, computer in her brain, right? So I really do feel like that tool, paying attention to what you're doing, writing it down, using these amazing tools that can literally, I had 2 eggs for breakfast. How much protein is that? Done. ChatGPT, done. Even nowadays, you don't even need GPT because Google has its own AI built in. You've probably started to see this when you do your Google searches. It gives you an AI answer at the top that's better than the search results that you get, right? So it's actually become integrated in all the things that we do. And I'm waiting for when Siri is giving you answers that are AI answers, which essentially it is, but there's a couple innovations I think that have to happen there. But yeah, paying attention. Paying attention is super important. Like you want to change your relationships. You have to pay attention to how you are in relationships. You want to change your eating. You first have to pay attention to how you eat. In precision nutrition, in our coaching programs, the first two habits or practices that we had anyone do were around nutrition, we'll call it, is number one, is eat slowly, right? So that was it. People are sign up for this program. They start exercising with us. They start getting sleep tips. And the first nutrition practice is eat slowly. And they're going, well, what the hell? Tell me about protein and calories and whatever, right? Well, you can't know anything about your eating until you slow it down and start paying attention. And we give them like exercises and practices around that. Now that you're eating slowly, now we're going to pay attention to what you're doing. And then the next practice is stop eating at 80% full. Even if weight gain was your goal, I like to spend 2 weeks tuning into hunger and appetite and satiety signals. So there's basically the first month, and it's a 12-month coaching program, you're spending paying attention, right? And there's loads of research on, this isn't just made up, on why this works. But that's the whole point. Pay attention. So if you need some practices, you can do those. If you're listening in, you're like, hey, I want to turn this around. I'm not doing great with my food and my body composition. Spend the next 2 weeks eating slowly. Figure out how long it takes you to eat breakfast, lunch, dinner. Double it. Don't be on your device. Just sit there. Think about what you're feeling. Think about what you're eating. It's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to be like, this is weird. Why am I doing this? But eventually it starts to soak in. You're like, oh, I'm noticing things I never noticed before about how textures taste, about how food feels, about how I feel after eating, about what I'm craving to do during eating. And then you try eating a little bit less than full. Try and feel what full feels like. Feel what overeating feels like. And now you have like words to go along with sensations in your body. And then once you have that, now you can start adjusting your protein, carbs, and fats. But until you can pay attention and slow down and notice what's happening in your life, you can't change anything.
Yeah.
So that would probably be the biggest tip.
That's really great advice. And John, we've come to the end of this so quickly. So I want to thank you for your time, but we always like to ask our guests one final question, and that's around our pillar of kindness.
Yeah.
And so is there someone you'd like to give a shout out to, someone who embodies these values that you like to live your life through, someone just who has deeply influenced you or inspired you along your journey?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've had some amazing friends and mentors along the way, from the individual I mentioned earlier, Peter Lemon, who was my graduate advisor. And really, I mean, I moved to a new country. And so he helped me so much along the way, to my first big mentor that I write about in my Changemaker book, Craig Bach, who kind of took me under his wing when I was 17, and not obviously someone that someone would bet on having success in the future. So, I mean, these are just, Tim Ziegenfuss was another great mentor of mine. There's so many people along the way, and, you know, lest I turn this into more advice, but really, I think one of my superpowers in life has been finding great people to stand next to and learn from. And I really like the stand next to metaphor more than mentor. It means different things to different people. For me, it's just like, who is doing amazing things in the way that I would want to do them? How do I go stand next to them as often as I can? So, you know, when I started coaching youth sports, I was like, I know about coaching, but I don't know about this age group per se. I don't know how to do this. Who around here is doing it really well? Okay. I would literally show up and go, let me carry your bag of balls around. Let me set up cones for you. And there have been several who are like looking at me kind of askew, like, what is this guy doing? He looks normal. You know what I mean? But they let me stand there. And that's been a real gift of mine, like presenting myself in a way, maybe it's with curiosity and support, not telling them anything I've done in my career. Like, I don't need to, I'm here to learn from you, not to brag about what I've done. And just be helpful. Go next to great people and good people. Be helpful. Stand next to them as often as you can so that you can learn and absorb and grow.
That's great advice.
So yeah,
That's great
I've
advice.
had too many kind people help me in this way, and but I think there's a strategy here as well, right? It's how do you get next to the kinds of people that you want to be next to learn how to be a great father, a great coach, a great business person, a great partner, whatever it is you want to work on.
Yeah, that's the thing I love about our community is that, you know, we can not talk for 10 years, but then you can come and sit and have a chat and a conversation like this, and, you know, just hopefully help some other people out there to do some good things. So, John, thank you very much today. That's been really awesome.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I appreciate you creating the platform to do this, and then allowing me to come knock the rust off today. I don't know when the last time I did a podcast was, so this is my first in a while.
Just quickly before you sign off, don't forget to visit network.allwellco.com and join our professional network. You'll get to enjoy exclusive benefits from brands we love and have access to a community where learning and professional development are always at the forefront of everything we do.